Cybersecurity awareness is a state of mind that is best delivered as part of an organization's culture, but that's not something that just happens. We talk about what it takes to make it happen today on this episode of the CyberWatch Expert Series. Welcome to the CyberWatch Expert Series. I'm your host, Curtis Franklin, and today I'm talking with David Habib, founding principal at RensWatch and the CIO at Brightspot. I'm going to be talking with David about the idea of cybersecurity awareness. Now, you'll hear a lot of cybersecurity experts talk about the importance of cybersecurity awareness, but it's easy to get lost in the questions around cybersecurity awareness training. Now, training can be a critical factor, and it is necessary for many regulatory compliance frameworks, but getting beyond a checkbox item means that cybersecurity awareness has to be ingrained in your organization's culture. David has experience doing that in his own organizations and helping others with cybersecurity awareness, and today we're going to hear his thoughts on how to make it happen in your organization. And now, my conversation with David Habib. David, it's wonderful having you with us here today on the CyberWatch Expert Series. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The first question I've got, I'm curious, and I'm sure that our listeners are, what's the path that led you to be here? How did you end up sitting across from me digitally, talking about cybersecurity?
So a good question. I've been bouncing around career-wise into the different disciplines of technology management. Started in customer support. I've done help desk. I've done project management, and so my career path has been very much trying something new, doing something I haven't done before. Which has led me to where I am now, which is as the CIO at a company called Brightspot, where my current infatuation and obsession is primarily cybersecurity.
Well, it sounds like a great path, and similar to mine. People ask me what my career plan and path was. I just said yes a lot.
That's a good plan. It's a good plan.
Yeah. So, but we're glad you're here, and we're talking about something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, and that is cybersecurity awareness. When you look at the security incidents that happen and what various analysts say companies can do to minimize those, train your employees is almost always number one on the list. So let me start by asking a really simple but potentially tricky question, and that is, to you, what is cybersecurity awareness?
So in the context of an enterprise, right? So in the context of for a company or whatever your organization is, I think it's important to be able to have a conversation with everyone about what information security means, what you're protecting, why it's important, before you enter into the conversation about the threats and the scary, right? So I think we spend a lot of time sort of reinforcing the context. This is the information that we are protecting. This is the information that we have from employees, that we have from our customers, that we have that as a company that we have. And we protect that because it's the right thing to do. We protect that because of the relevant regulations. And then you can introduce what are we protecting it from, right? What are the threats that your team can help you face? And that's, when we talk about awareness, it is for us, and I believe this is the only way it really works, and a sustained and ongoing conversation. And I mean conversation as in, it's not me as a mouthpiece. It's, for us, it's Slack channels, it's regular meetings, it's, being playful with things like the synthetic phishing campaigns and that sort of thing. Um, Making people aware of that they're a part of something and why it's important.
It sounds like this is the sort of thing that, I mean, as you describe it, it seems very natural and like the sort of conversation that you could easily have, you know, in the break room. But I know that there are a lot of companies that get very formal
Yes.
and spend a lot of money on awareness. So I guess my next question is, given what awareness is, how involved, how formal, and ultimately how expensive does it have to be?
I think if you're spending real money on it, I think that's a sign you might be going down the wrong path. Because I think that it is, like I said, it is a conversation. And for us, as the company has grown, we started as a primarily engineering organization. As we've grown, we have more and more folks who are not, who are not engineers, who are not super technically savvy. And so you have to evolve the conversation a little bit, right? So you have to, and maybe you're a little bit more colloquial with things, a little bit less nerdy with things. Um, but the the folks who are trying to sell you something, whether it's consulting or whether it's software, this is a difficult thing for them to break into, because what they want to do is they want to get a recurring revenue from you, and I don't think that's I don't think that's a good way to spend the energy, right? I think you'd be better off spending the same amount of money on time or on snacks so that you can have the conversation with the folks i- in the context of your business or in the context of your organization, because the consultants are going to come with their point of view. Unless they're exactly focused on the industry that you're in, unless they're focused on exactly the kind of customers that you have, they're going to be genericized, and that tends to sort of get a shell of formality around it. And I just don't think that's people sense that, right? People know when they're getting somebody else's slideware, versus when you invite people into the conversation, welcome them into the conversation. There's no shaming. There's no, singling people out. That's very difficult for a third party to monetize. It's very difficult for someone to measure. So if you're trying to get your SOC 2 or you're trying to get your ISO, it's very difficult for that framework to circumscribe like what awareness is. And so what is described in those things, if anything, does tend to be very formal. And if your goal is to check those boxes, then the results are going to be very formal. So I think, it's, this is not a spend money thing. This is a pay attention thing. And this is a, get, get out from behind your desk thing. Because the threat is very real. But that threat is not just to your company. It's not just to your personal reputation. Is this, their information is in play as well.
It's interesting because you point out that most cybersecurity awareness training companies preach that this is not a do it once per employee, tick the box, and you're finished. They have the ongoing training. But even if you're not using their services, do you see this as a continuing, ongoing conversation, or is it something where you sit a new employee down once during their onboarding, tell them that there are bad people out there, and you're done with it?
Actually, I would go further than it's ongoing. What I try to do is I try to tell people that it needs to be part of your culture, right? Like your organization has a culture, your company, your church, your school, there's a culture there. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to make it a part of that culture. And that sounds a little bit corny, but we talk about cybersecurity training. that's a dimension of awareness. I'm not against cybersecurity training. We consume a lot of commercial cybersecurity training, but I introduce it every quarter. These are the classes I've selected. Here's why I've selected them. Here's how long it's probably going to take. If you have any questions, we'll talk about it in the next meeting. The synthetic phishing, here's some articles that I read. Here's, that sort of thing. It's what we've seen is if you do that enough, it starts to bounce back at you, right? And so when folks come to me or when folks share articles or share like the latest fish that they got and how funny it was, or, reach out to the new employees and say, hey, by the way, you're going to get a text from someone claiming to be the CEO, because we all do, but it's not him. Like that's where you start to know that you've woven it into the fabric. And that's, you obviously, it takes a lot of energy, not only to sort of maintain that momentum, but also to steer it a little bit, make sure you're focusing on the right thing. Because the threat marketplace is evolving. But you can build up a certain amount of momentum where like, if you look away, it will continue to carry forward. And I think that's what's important. Not only that's an ongoing input, but that there's momentum in the organization. That's when I think you've made it part of the culture.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question, because you talk about being a part of the culture, and absolutely agree. It really should be. But when you talk to most executives, when they're looking at their culture, you hear words like aggressive and agile,
Mhm.
not necessarily the agile discipline, but
Right.
being um, and responsive. All of these things that in the Silicon Valley context are the, move fast and break things kind of context, none of which really has time for cybersecurity. So is it a challenge to balance those things in a culture? Because so many times I hear about security issues that came about because some employee bypassed security plans because they were slowing them down, or they were
Mhm.
preventing them from responding to a customer in a particular way. That kind of thing. Is that a challenge?
It is. I think it's always a challenge. I think that there's sort of two pieces to it that I try to keep in mind, that I advise people to try to keep in mind. The first one is it you need to make it not look like you're running around with a tinfoil hat. Like if you're the representative for cybersecurity to the executive team, it's very important that you don't come in with like a series of investments you want to make because of a series of threats that sound like, a horror movie, right? That's not tangible, right? And it's certainly not something that plays correctly to the bottom line. So I tend to potentially oversimplify things. I tend to characterize things as like, it's great that you have bars on the third floor windows, but there's no front door, right? And it's sort of like, this is what we're talking about. This is table stakes kind of stuff. Explain it in a way that makes sense. Describe it. I always talk in terms of risk, but I have the luxury of being able to do that, right? I think a lot of the folks that we're talking to may not be in a situation where they're conducting an annual risk assessment and then framing it in the context of the business. But so I think problem one is don't get carried away with the cybersecurity-ness, because that just seems like tinfoil hat stuff, right? It seems like, they're never going to run out of reasons for us to give them money. Like bring it back down to something tangible and be realistic. And the other thing is, you talk about people who circumvent the security controls because the other incentives they have, right, to move fast, fail fast. And my my focus goes to the person who created those controls, right? Because part of your job as, someone who's creating this or integrating cybersecurity into the culture is understanding the rest of the culture, right? Understanding what really drives the company. And I'm not talking about the vision statement on the wall, like that's somebody else's problem, but like what, for example, our organization lives and dies in Slack. we have a lot of information in Slack, a lot of conversations in Slack, and the your first instinct as sort of an information manager is to say, I need to protect that, right? And because there's information in there that I don't want to get lost, and information that certainly don't want to be leaked. There's information there that is outdated, and I don't want to be used when it, right? So you get very concerned about that. But following that logic, putting up walls and restrictions and aging information out makes sense, right? On paper, it looks great. The auditors would love it. But doing that that's going to impact the actual culture of the business, because the actual culture of the business is we collaborate in this format. That's what we do, right? And we're very successful with it, and different teams talk to each other, and like it works. So as a security person, you come in and you say, this is the context. How do I protect it without changing it? Right. And if you think that way, you're still going to have people who are going to, let somebody piggyback in the door, and you're still going to have people who put their passwords on sticky notes. That's going to happen. But in general, the fewer fences you're putting up that people notice, the better off you're going to be, and the less likely people are going to have to circumvent your controls in order to do what the boss is asking them to do.
So let's think specifically about some of the smaller companies that are out there, because obviously, if you are a large enterprise, very well resourced, you have many options available to you. But if you are at a smaller company, and let's say you are someone who has been tasked with cybersecurity as part of your IT general role, how do you start these conversations? What can you do to convince management that having these conversations is a worthwhile part of what you should be doing, because you are going to have to invest the company's money in the
Yep.
form of your time, if nothing else,
At least,
in
yeah.
having these conversations.
I think there's 1,000 ways to do it, of course, and I'm not sure that my way is exactly the right way. But I like to start with an inventory of what we're trying to protect, right? Because it depends. If you're in healthcare, you have a very specific and sort of radioactive set of data that you're protecting, right? And so if I'm a dentist's office and I have 5 employees, there's a disproportionate amount of risk in the information that we're handling relative to the staff that we have to protect it, because the IT person is more than likely the person at the front desk, right? And then they outsource IT to somebody. So I think you start with, let's take an inventory of what is in our treasury, our information treasury. What are we trying to protect, and why is it important, right? So if you're in healthcare, you have a trove of other people's information you need to protect. You have devices that people, like bad actors, would like to compromise in order to get into that information, or if you're a hospital, maybe just to lock it down and to be vicious about it. And if you sort of describe what you are protecting, it allows you to exclude what you're not protecting, which combats the tinfoil hat thing, right? Like, we're not trying to, if I'm a dentist, I'm not going to invest a lot of money in preventing denial of service attacks, right? I don't care, right? Like, I
Right.
care, but I don't care. Even if someone defaced my website, the risk is somewhat low. I would just go and, turn it off until I put it back up. Whereas if you're a media company, that is not the case at all, right? Like, that's your lifeblood. You're going to spend a lot more attention to it. So you have to sort of draw a circle around what's important to you and your business, and then think about and get some help thinking about, if you can, like, what are the threats to those things, right? So the dentist office example, what you're really worried about is physical security for files and physical access to the devices. That's relatively straightforward. And then you've got ransomware and malware to worry about. Oh, well, how does that get in? Well, there's 2 dimensions to that. One is, how did that get in? Somebody called, somebody sent an email, somebody, left a thumb drive in the driveway. The other thing is, does that computer need to have access to that information? Does the scheduling computer need to have access to the health information? No, it doesn't, right? Or maybe it does. And so you start, again, like, it's an exercise in narrowing down, right? Because access control is inexpensive. Antivirus software is inexpensive. Anti-DDoS solutions are not inexpensive. And so you want to be able to make sure you're spending the right money on the right things, but always able to come back to, here's the practical reality of the business that we're in and the information that we're protecting that is either entrusted to us or is our secret sauce.
If you were talking to someone about this, are there places people can go? I know that on some aspects of cybersecurity, there are frameworks out there. NIST is a great resource for a lot of folks. Is there a resource like that? Is there a resource pool where you would send someone if they came to you and said, "I've been a generalist. I've just been told, hi, you are now our security person." Where do they go to get started?
I think it's a great question. I think you start with a community. Maybe it's Reddit. Maybe it's an online community, a Slack group. You're right, a Discord, because even those frameworks like NIST or SOC or ISO or those things, they are very, very comprehensive, and so they're good. But if you haven't sort of got the basics, they can be very intimidating, and they can lead you down the wrong path for sure. So, in my experience, cybersecurity professionals love to talk to people about cybersecurity stuff, right? Like much like database administrators love to talk about databases. And so you can bypass a lot of the consultancies and the pay to read articles and that sort of thing. And first just start asking. It doesn't matter how dumb the question is because we've all seen it before. Start asking the questions like, should I worry about a DDoS attack? Right? Like, what is a DDoS attack? Right? And you're going to get answers from those communities, and they're going to be answers that you're going to be able to digest, and they're going to be able to, at least what I've seen, they're going to ask you the next question. This is what a DDoS attack is. What is your website for? Right? And then they're going to get that kind of conversation. So I would start with the communities. I would also, this is a little bit of a trick, but vendors will do a lot of free consulting. And so you can go to a website for somebody that sells something that you're not sure you want and read their website. And they have salespeople and marketing people and engineers who are doing their best to take a complicated idea and simplify it. And they're also going to have things like a Gartner report or a Forrester report that you can download. And so then you start getting some stuff there where someone else is doing the work for you to narrow down the conversation. Obviously, they want to sell you their product, but they've created a little bit of a pool of, a little safe pool of information about how to think about the problem. And as long as you take it with a grain of salt, that's more helpful than, again, like picking up your NIST and turning to page 45.
I understand that completely. Well, David, it's hard to believe, but we're coming down to the end of our time together. Couple of final questions. First, you've got just a couple of significant points. What are the points that you'd like to leave people with, just to send them off in the right direction when it comes to cybersecurity awareness?
I think the important thing is to always start with what information do you have that you're protecting, right? Like, what are you securing? And the second thing is to remember that it's the investment is in time and in conversation. It's not in software. It's not in documentation. It's not in firewalls. When you're talking about cybersecurity awareness is when you meet people where they are. That's how you make them aware. So if you have those two tenets, I think the rest of it is just elbow grease.
Outstanding. And final question. You have given us just a wealth of information today. We really appreciate it. Do you blog, or are there ways people can keep up with you if they want to continue to have some of your thoughts on cybersecurity?
I should do a better job of this than I do, but I do things for Brightspot, and they get posted on LinkedIn, on Brightspot site, and then on LinkedIn. I'll do conferences. Following me on LinkedIn will that's where these things surface, because they tend to be all over the place.
Outstanding. Well, David, we appreciate you taking time out of a busy day to be with us today. Look forward to perhaps having another conversation with you in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. This was great. Thanks again.
Well, that was my conversation with David Habib. We appreciate David taking the time to be with us today on this episode. Join me next week for the CyberWatch Expert Series, when I'll have another experienced expert who will help you gain the information you need to be more successful at making your organization cyber secure. This podcast has been brought to you by Access Point Consulting. Follow along with the CyberWatch Expert Series on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And as always, you can learn more about Access Point Consulting at www.accesspointconsulting.com. I'm Curtis Franklin. We'll see you next week.